Key West may really be a piece of paradise on earth. Magical sunsets at the Mallory Dock. Ernest Hemingway, his house, and his six-toed cats, which you can still see the descendants of today and pet them and get licked by them. Treasure from sunken Spanish fleets scattered across the sands, such as the Atocha. Spring breaks, drinking it up and carousing on Duval Street. And then there's even the supernatural, such as Robert the Haunted Doll, that if you take his picture without his permission, he will haunt you from a distance. Sometimes called Key Weird, but more often called the Conch Republic, this small 5-square-mile island community has its own unique culture. And with that culture comes those whose brains don't necessarily fire on the same cylinders as you or I do. Tanzler was one of these such folks. Nightly visiting his beloved in the mausoleum he had custom built for her, Tanzler would, under cover of night, drag her decaying corpse home with him to live in happy, if not putrid, non-consensual bliss. In this episode of Two Friends and a Coffin, Carls and Behn speak for Maria Elena de Hoyos, the unwilling corpse bride of Key West. Welcome back. Welcome to episode 4. Episode 4, and this time it's me doing the storytelling.
Ooh.
But last time was a great episode on Rodney Alcala.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any words you have to say in hindsight?
Sorry for all my mispronunciations, and I'll get better at that.
Well, the good news is this is another episode where we totally botched the Spanish language.
Oh, joy.
No, yeah, but we are going to Key West. Do you have that key lime pie going on?
I forgot my pie!
What? You forgot your pie?
I forgot it!
Oh my gosh. Well, can you go to the fridge and just grab a key lime and just suck on it?
Suck on it?
Suck on the lime.
I'll go get it.
All right, go get it. Go get your lime. Have you ever been to Key West?
I have not.
Oh my gosh. Key West is so much fun. Gorgeous. It's kind of like it's in between the Atlantic on one side and the Caribbean on one side. So it's got these cross breezes. It's amazing snorkeling and diving. The food, amazing Cuban food. It's what I think is heaven and paradise in the continental US.
Ooh, that sounds gorgeous.
It is. So at this time, this is supposedly a great love story. You don't sound convinced of that.
I don't. It's almost like it's trying too hard.
Try to.
Whenever anyone's like, it's a great love story, you're like, is it though?
Is it? I mean, this definitely has
Romeo and Juliet. Is it though?
It's definitely a story that many, many, many podcasts have covered. Not really true crime podcasts, but more in the weird podcasts, those types of things. That's where you kind of see this.
Dark history.
Yeah, dark history. Anything about Key West on the dark side of Key West, it'll come up.
Ooh.
Anything about the history of Key West, this is it. Carl Tanzler, he's not a serial killer. And like us, our mission of speaking for the victims, there is one victim in this story, arguably, and that's Miss Maria Elena de Hoyos, whose married name was Mesa.
Beautiful name.
I don't know if it's beautiful the way I said it, but so it's, you
committed.
I did commit it, and I rolled my R's, and lots of people cringed, but hey, A for effort, right?
Yes.
Her name is very typical of, Spanish, a lot of European cultures, a lot of where basically they have multiple names. The first name, Maria, is her Christian name, Elena, her given name, Milagro, her mother's name, de Hoyos, her father's name, and finally Mesa would have been her married name. So
Okay.
a lot of different names for different people in her life, different, just identifying her as her. It's
Mhm.
weird to us white people, but to lots of cultures around the world, and have these multiple names like that. And in some ways, I think we're missing out.
I do too.
I know. I guess I would be John and Dorothy Ann. Like, yeah, call me Dorothy,
You got it, Dorothy.
and you can be a friend of Dorothy.
Oh.
Woo! So, on that note, let's follow the yellow brick road and go back down to Key West.
All right.
Aruba, Jamaica, ooh, I wanna take you. Bermuda, Bahama, come on, pretty mama. Key Largo, Montego, baby, why don't we go? Jamaica, off the Florida Keys.
So, we're going not necessarily to Key West first. We're going about 70 miles across the channel to Cuba.
Cuba.
And this is in 1909. July 31st, 1909. This is when Maria was born. She was born the middle child of Francisco Hoyos and Aurora Milagro. Francisco was a cigar maker, and by all accounts, the family was decently well off when they were in Cuba. And at some point, their fortunes changed. He was forced to come to bring his family to Key West, Florida, where there was a pretty big cigar making economy down there. But about the time they came, the cigar making the economy had actually tanked in Key West, and so the family was actually pretty poor for the time that they got here. So they got to Key West. There was the parents, Francisco and Aurora. There was the eldest daughter, Florinda, who everyone called in the family Nana. And then there was Elena, who was the middle child. And then there was the baby, Celia. Just the three of them. And the children were basically raised for a lot of their childhood in Key West. By all accounts, Maria was a beautiful, beautiful girl.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Very elegant.
She is, yeah. She has that really beautiful hair.
Yes, gorgeous dark hair.
Mm-hmm. Very, very striking, wouldn't you say?
I would.
She was so beautiful that tourists would see her walking down the street and would stop her and want to take their picture of her. In fact, the picture that you see there, the one where she's kind of dressed up like I guess a flapper girl.
The one with the flowers?
Yeah, that one was actually in the newspaper in the Key West, Florida. It was taken at some dance that she had attended, and they decided to put her picture in the newspaper.
Wow.
So that was a little before the time where she met Luis Mesa, and in 1926, at the age of 18, they married, and they were very happy together. And then disaster hit.
Oh no.
Fortunately, Elena miscarried. They lost the baby, and her health just didn't seem to recover. At first, the family thought it was depression, mourning over this. So after a while, they thought, okay, this is not normal. Something is wrong. So the doctor came in, the family doctor, and essentially he suspected that she may have contracted tuberculosis. Terrible, terrible disease. It's not something we hear about that much today. It's still very much a problem in the US. You still see it in immigrant populations, not necessarily where people are contracting tuberculosis here in the States. It's more they've contracted it before they immigrated, and now they're dealing with the after effects of it. But in the 1900s, it was literally a massive killer of people in the US. Went in and it ravaged entire families.
Ugh.
And usually, of course, it ravaged the much poorer populations who were
Mhm.
a lot of the households were basically on top of one another. The tenement houses, places that are very squished in. So a lot of opportunities that when you have an outbreak, it's going to travel and it's going to travel quick among people because there's a lot of them real close to one another.
Right, which is why it runs through families so much, because especially back in that time, it was so small quarters that one person taking care of the other, and then they get it, and so on and so forth.
And there also is cultural considerations too, in such as in the Latino culture, Cuban culture, families are incredibly close. They many families come to immigrate together, and in the case of the Milagros and the Hoyos family, they did all come together. So there were lots of cousins hanging around. The cigar makers, all their families were very close together. So people would go over on Sundays in the evenings over everybody's houses. That's part of the culture in
Mhm.
that time
Yeah.
period and of these families. So there was lots of opportunities to catch tuberculosis.
Oof.
And tuberculosis, it is a bacterium. It's the
Mhm.
mycobacterium that basically it's really kind of scary in the fact that it will seal itself up and basically protect itself from being attacked by the body and create these cells, these hard cells called tubercles. And basically it ravages the lungs
Mhm.
and it's also known as consumption. You may have heard the
Mhm.
term consumption.
I
That
have. Because isn't
and
that also like kind of where a good chunk of vampire lores come from?
ooh, tell me about that.
Oh, so in like when it was running rampant, people would think that somebody who's passed on from it was then feeding and consuming the life force of the rest of the family. So then they thought that that's not where it came from, but a good chunk of vampire lore ties back to tuberculosis/consumption.
Isn't it funny how just these diseases kind of meld with mythology and folklore and just keep things perpetuating?
Because especially with like consumption and tuberculosis, there's so much. Then there's blood around your mouth, and they think that maybe you've been feeding.
Oh no, feeding. I've been told by multiple people this past week to stop that.
Doing the Hannibal Lecter thing.
Well, unfortunately, today we're talking about lungs and not livers. And there's no Chianti, but I do have a lovely Pellegrino sparkling soda.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's not key lime, it's aranciata though. So unfortunately, Maria contracted tuberculosis, and so the doctor sent her to the hospital. And in Key West, it was the Marine Hospital. Now, Key West it's on the water. It's 70 miles from Cuba. It was a massive strategic naval port for the U.S.
Okay.
It's where the USS Maine was. It was the port of call of the USS Maine when it left and got blown up at the start of World War One.
Mm.
The Maine was out of Key West Harbor, so there's a lot of strategic, a lot of military presence, a lot of sailors. So there was a Marine hospital, and it was actually used by the poorer populations of Key West for um, for specialists, such as for tuberculosis. So the family were told to take Elena to the hospital. They took her there, and that is when she met Carl Tanzler, or
Mhm.
Karl von Cossel.
Oh, speaking of vampires.
I don't know if he actually just talked like that, but it does sound very, very vampirish,
It
doesn't it?
does.
Yes. Well, Carl Tanzler, and we're going to call him Carl Tanzler because that was the name, that his anglicized name. He was actually born January 12th, 1877, in Dresden, in the province of Saxony,
Mm.
in Germany. He was born Georg Karl Tanzler. And just like, in some ways similar to the Latino culture where your first name is a Christian name, but it's your middle name that you go by. That's what Tanzler went by. He went by Carl. When he came to the US, he started calling himself Karl von Cossel. His early years are very shrouded in mystery. We do know, according to his birth record in German birth records, that he was born the son of Karl Friedrich Tanzler and Emily Pauline Schultz. From his accounts, because he wrote an account of his early life, his narrative was that he was a count, and so he actually made people call him Count von Cossel.
You'll know that I am called the Count.
And he was descended from this very aristocratic family and a very famous Van Cossel family. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know. In these accounts, they were very romantic, I was one of these brilliant people, that I was a scientist and I got 27 degrees at university. I mean, seriously, this guy is a narcissist. And basically, he wrote it in 1947, and he basically talks about this entire story from his perspective. It's very gothic in the way, and the ghost of my ancestor came into me. It's just seriously very Victorian Gothic. It's like, all right, Carl, calm your tits now. There's nothing in it to indicate that he was aristocratic. No extra names, just plain Georg Karl Tanzler.
And it seems like he's quite a bit older than Maria, right?
77 to 87, 97, 07. So about 32 years.
32?
I mean, age is just a number.
Oh, right.
It doesn't really matter. It's what's inside that counts, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll get into consent later. That's a whole different issue. We're just talking about romance, okay?
Oh, right.
Romance, nothing, not even age, can stand in the way. Carl did have a fascinating life. He was clearly cultured. He spoke very good English. People who knew him when he came to the States remarked that he spoke, of course, with a little bit of an accent, but he was very well spoken. He was smart. He was a tinkerer. He loved to construct things. He would build electrical devices. He had a thing for boats, and there's reports that throughout many of his years in the places he lived, every single place he was reconstructing. When he was in Australia, it was a submarine. When it was in Key West, it was an airplane. He definitely had an engineering mind, a science-geared mind. Now, whether he was trained in that, we don't know. We don't have those records, but he was a curious fellow, and he loved to think. And he traveled all over the world. In the 1900s, it did bring him to Australia. And when World War I broke out, he was imprisoned in Trial Bay in the internment camp there, where he was held for several years until the end of the war. This did happen because his name does come up. Karl von Cossel is listed as one of the prisoners who is registered as an alien registration by the Australian government. He comes back from World War I, from being imprisoned. He goes back to Germany. He goes and lives with his mom, and that's when he gets married. He marries Anna Doris Schaefer, and he has two lovely daughters. He has an Aisha, and he has a Clarissa. We'll just call her. Eventually, though, things are bad in Germany. We're talking it's the end of World War I. It's the 1920s. As we know, inflation is going out the roof. It's a bad time to be in Germany. And because it was so bad, that's how Hitler would get into power. The Weimar government, not a good time. Carl's like, let's get the hell out of here. He goes to the U.S. to immigrate because his sister had immigrated to Florida a few years before. And so he went to go see her. And so in 1926, he comes to Florida, to a small little farm podunk town called Zephyr Hills. And then his family comes, his wife and his 2 daughters come the next year.
Okay, I was gonna say, did he just leave them there?
No, he brought him over and then promptly abandoned them.
Okay.
I don't know why he even bothered to bring him over, but a year later, he said, you know what? I need to go find some way to make money. And so clearly Zephyr Hills was not the way to do that. So he's like, I'm going to Key West. So he goes to Key West. And that's where he's living. He gets a job at the Marine Hospital as a radiologist, except he keeps telling everybody he's an actual doctor.
So, like, people he meets on the street, he's like, I'm a doctor, but really he's just a radiologist.
Yeah.
Not to diss radiologists out there in the world.
Not at all. I mean, I would be happy to call myself a radiologist, you know? But it's just kind of like, you didn't go through the schooling. And when you say doctor, people think something different than radiologist.
Exactly.
No, Carl, not a doctor.
Sometimes I get carried away.
Not a doctor. But he's a radiologist, and he gets the job, and clearly he's actually decent at it, so he's able to talk his way into the job.
Okay.
So he gets there, he's working there, and that's when he meets Elena.
Okay.
Now, we mentioned that Elena had, her doctor had suspected she had tuberculosis and said, we need to get you further tests. Let's send you to the hospital and get them to check it out. She goes in and gets ready, and they tell her, look, we need to get an x-ray for you. And because that's actually how they diagnose, is they get an x-ray of you and they look at your lungs. That's generally how it's done, at least in those days. So here is what Count von Cossel, or is it Dr. Cossel, or is it Carl Tanzler? I don't know. Doesn't really say what he says. It calls himself at this time, but this is what he thought of that meeting. Do you want me to read it with the accent or no?
I think it's brilliant.
In the middle of my routine work, I received a call from the head office to go and take a blood test from a young senorita who, as an outpatient, had come for examination. Well, I hardly look at patient as I enter the room. The first thing I noticed of her personality, as I bent down to take a drop of blood from one of her fingertips, well, rather than one of her ears, which were too exquisitely lovely to mar, was that her hand was unusually small. Not sure what her hand has to do with her personality, but it's Carl. Its long, tapering fingers, the loveliest I had ever seen. As the needle struck, the hand twitched a little, and it was then that from my kneeling position I raised my head for the first time to say, I don't know why this is the first time he raised his head. He's already commented that her ears were too lovely to take a fucking blood sample from, but apparently he didn't see her, so this is the second time he's raising his head. I'm very sorry to have caused you pain. Forgive me, please. Oh, no. That's what he's saying to her. Oh, she was like, oh. And he's like, oh, I'm very sorry to have caused you pain, my senorita. Forgive me, please. Her face had been hidden by her hands so that I had hardly seen it as I first entered the room. But then she withdrew her hand to answer me, and I looked into a face of unearthly beauty, the face of my dreams and visions, the face of the bride which had been promised to me by my ancestor 40 years before. As you can tell, yeah. Do you see what I mean about absolutely gothic and just like so over the top? It's like,
yes.
Sometimes I get carried away.
Yeah. So that was their first meeting. And there's absolutely no comment on what she thought of him. Probably
Didn't
He
give it a second
diagnosed her
thought.
with tuberculosis, and she cried, and that was that. That was probably her first impression was, here's the dude that told me I'm gonna fucking die.
Yeah.
Apparently, he becomes absolutely what's the term for these types?
Obsessed.
Obsessive. He begins to stalk her.
Oh,
Yeah,
lovely.
stalk her, and because as he also is a doctor apparently, he decides he's going to take on her treatment plan. And so he goes to their house and he gets in with the entire family, and he's like, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to buy her all sorts of fruit and fresh vegetables and soup, and she's going to have the healthiest diet. And then I'm going to come in with my electrical machine. Then I'm going to order all the parts from all over the US and build this machine and come and zap her.
But you're not a doctor.
Yeah, I'm not not a doctor. Hashtag not a doctor.
Hashtag not a doctor.
And so he does all this, and the family's like, okay, this is weird, but okay. And he's coming to their house every day. And in the midst of this, he starts bringing her all sorts of gifts and starts laying it on thick and giving her rings and giving her jewelry. And
she's married.
we did neglect that after she had the miscarriage and she got sick. Apparently, Louise got a little scared and ran off to Miami.
She's abandoned.
She's a
along with
single
everything.
chick. She's back on the market.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure that's how she saw it, right?
And no matter how weird it is, the family is just hoping that he'll help, and so they're like, okay, this is weird, but if he can save her.
And he's sure of himself. He's pompous. He's arrogant. Even in the book, he comes across as a pompous ass. That's even the way he justifies himself. He's like, these simple people didn't know what they were doing, and they would bring in all their friends and all their family at all hours of the night, and she couldn't get any sleep. And I told them she needed her rest.
Jeez.
Yeah, and all this stuff, and I've never been able to determine for how long this treatment plan went on, but it seems it went on maybe a year or two, so it was pretty extensive.
Pretty lengthy.
At some point, though, it becomes apparent that he's really into her, and he basically proposes to her.
Okay.
And the family's not quite into this.
Hmm.
Mom basically says, fuck this. If my daughter does remarry, it's going to be to another Cuban.
Okay.
First of all, I don't know if they would have gotten divorced because they're a Catholic family, and divorce also didn't happen in those days either. So,
No.
yeah, so there's that, but there's the other issue that they really didn't see this doctor who's 32 years her senior as a good match.
Yeah.
So the family says, nope, we're going to. And so they move and go somewhere different in town and don't tell the doctor where they move to. They basically say, don't call us.
But they're still in Key West.
They're still in Key West. And apparently during this time, they go to a different doctor, different treatment plan. It's important to know to just state that this Carl was just he was over the heels in love, supposedly.
Mhm.
He was obsessed with her. He clearly knew about tuberculosis and knew she was dying, but he refused to admit it and probably was like, I'm going to do whatever I can to stop her from dying.
I'm going to save her because I'm a narcissist.
Exactly. Other doctors, everybody probably knew that it was not curable. It's, there probably a lot of doctors were, their plan of action was let's keep her comfortable and let's make her, the rest of her life as comfortable as can.
Yeah.
So other doctors are doing their thing, but everybody in that time knew that she was probably going to die. At some point, though, he finds the family And he basically forces his way into the house and says, that's it. I'm taking back over her treatment because clearly she had gotten worse. And so he starts his experimental treatments again.
That's so creepy.
Yep. So creepy. And he's basically taking shit from the hospital. He's basically doing a lot of abuse of power.
Jeez.
At some point, he also loses his job at the hospital. Now, whether it's because he was furloughed by new management or they're like, "You're stealing shit from us. Get the fuck out." Don't know. But at some point, he loses his job, and he's like, "Yay! Now I can devote my entire time to my beloved Elena."
Oh no.
Yeah, so he's always there. He starts buying extravagant gifts. Like he's buying her a whole canopy bed. He's buying her a radio. Like all this stuff. So like I'm not really sure how this family kept this up and allowed this. I don't know. I've this is just a weird situation where this old guy who says he's a doctor is basically saying whether they thought too it's a family that was going for any hope in the world. I don't know. Well, unfortunately, it was tuberculosis, and Carl was not able to save her. Carl would always blame her father, who would take her on drives and basically claim that the fact he kept moving her and taking her for drives killed her.
But fresh air is good.
That's what I would think, but no, Carlos would no, she has to be bedridden the entire time.
Like I heard the doctors used to prescribe horseback riding for tuberculosis.
Maybe, but unfortunately, they took their last ride and he got the word and came to the house and found that on October 25th, 1931, she had died. He's absolutely, stricken. He is over, like, grieved as anything. He's like, I'm going to pay for everything. I'm going to pay for her funeral expenses, her burial, and the family probably didn't have much to pay for that. So they're probably like, sure, go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
So she has a lavish funeral. They go to the church. They go from the church to Key West Cemetery, and then she's buried. Well, Carl had wanted her to be buried in a mausoleum, but they hadn't been able to. It was going to take a while. So she was in a temporary grave. Well, it took about 6-7 months for the mausoleum to be completed. And finally they dug her up and brought her to the mortuary. And Carl's just goes ballistic because her being in the ground had, there'd been some decomposition and
done what it does.
The casket had started rotting away, and she clearly had was starting to turn a little sour herself. So he did this whole treatment where he basically cleaned her up and soaked her in a formaldehyde bath and basically put her in this, I don't know what to call it except a tank, and filled it with preservative liquid. And so all I can think of is, Star Wars with Luke Skywalker and Empire Strikes Back, where he's in the Bacta tank. That's totally what I'm thinking of here. She's sitting there in this tank, and that gets put into an outer casket with all these clamps and screws, and basically it's a sealed casket, which is actually pretty common in the 1920s to have one of these really outer caskets that just sealed you in. So they do that. The tomb is completed, and she gets put in, and she goes to her rest. Now, the tomb that he built for her was pretty elaborate. It
looks like a little house.
It was Elena's little house, and it had like a cupola type thing, and it had a door and windows with curtains. And what he didn't tell anyone was that he had the only key.
Oh.
Every night for the next year and a half, he went to visit her every night, like 9 o'clock p.m. He would show up and he would spend hours and hours and hours.
Okay.
And he would serenade her and he would sing to her.
I count slowly, slowly, slowly getting faster. Once I start in counting, it's very hard to stop. Hey!
He even got to the point where he opened up all the hatches. I don't know what to call them, but the locks, and opened up the outer coffin and like kind of unscrewed the fill up valve on the tank and would like listen to her and smell her. And it's kind of, he puts it much more romantically and much more, I'm just gonna put it and say that, yeah, you're just nasty, dude.
Yeah. Ew.
Ew. I mean,
Ew.
he says that the candle blew out and suddenly all of the locks on the device flew open and I heard a massive snap, 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 snap.
Okay.
I'm like, I'm sure that happened, right? Right, Carl?
We're going witchy here.
Uh-huh. It's pretty much like that. So, well,
Yeah.
at some point, Elena starts talking to him.
Oh, does she?
She does. And she basically says, take me out of here. I want to come home with you.
Probably talking to him more than she did when she was alive.
Now, I'm not going to I don't want to make fun of people with mental illness, but we do have to say that this possibly could be a mental illness thing. There really isn't much of a sense of what this could be. We don't know, was he schizophrenic? Clearly he had some sort of psychosis where he was having these episodes where he was hearing things that weren't there. We know that he didn't have a lot of friends. He was very much insular into his own work. He created these very dramatic backstories for himself. So who knows? We don't know what he may have suffered from. And clearly this was not helping. This is not indication of a sane guy.
Yeah.
We also don't know if he was making this up to basically sell a story and make it sound like, oh, I took the body home with me, that's what it was. Instead, he made up, oh, she wanted me to, and she was talking to me. He play it up that all this was happening to justify it?
Right.
We don't know.
Or was it real?
Yeah, what was real and what was not real. And I think that is the heart of the matter, is in Carl's mind, what was real and what was not real.
Mm-hmm.
What was not real was that Elena was very much dead. And Elena was very much falling apart by this time. So, but Carl is not going to take no for an answer. There's all sorts of also consent issues going on here.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, taking a dead body home with you is that considered a victimless crime?
No.
You had to think there. You're like, I don't want it to be, but is it?
But then you think about the family and everything. That's not victimless. She was still a person.
Hey, if they didn't know about it, it's all good. What they don't know won't hurt them. And probably what they don't know, they don't want to know either.
They don't want to know.
They don't want to know. Well.
En una horrenda noche hizo pedazos el mármol de la tumba abandonada. Cavó la tierra y se llevó en sus brazos el rígido esqueleto de su amada.
Carl decides to take matters into his own hand, and he's going to take his lovely bride, the Contessa, home with him. So one night, he gets a child's red wagon. He buys it from the store
Oh, that's haunting.
and he takes it out to the cemetery. And he takes, and once again, when he writes about this, it's this fucking the most dramatic escape from the cemetery you have ever heard. It's like the shadows. She was aiding me in my. I mean, God, you really cannot make this shit up. Okay, I have to do this just because this is. At last, the new moon had come. The night was pitch dark, and promises to the dead are sacred and must be kept. Leaving the door wide open, I went down inside and spoke a few words into the coffin valve. Darling, I have come to fulfill my promise to you. Sleep now, darling, gently for a while, until you are with me. God bless you. There was no place for the living here on this blackest of nights. All of the cemetery was alive with souls which came out of the graves from all sides, moving and thronging all around us. It was indeed like a festival among the departed, as they moved up on all sides. It was like a great divine wedding march for me taking place. It could not be a funeral march, for all seemed happy and joyful and interested in silent admiration, watching as the white forms of angels filled past Elena and me in their midst. So yeah, and then
like, it's not bad if it were a fictional novel.
This guy, I mean, he writes it like this is the greatest love story ever, doesn't he?
Yeah.
It's like Romeo and Juliet has nothing fucking on this book. Then something really super funny happens is that he has to lift this coffin over. And meanwhile, this is not a regular coffin. This is a metal inner casket that has been filled with liquid of preservation plus a body.
Jeez.
So he has to get it over the cemetery gate.
Oh,
So
God.
he like pushes this up and crawls over and then is going to lean it down and it falls on top of him.
Good.
It falls on top of him and basically the valve like opens and he gets doused with rotting corpse fluid all over him.
Oh, nasty.
And it was so bad that he had to there was nowhere to wash up. So he goes to the store and buys a bottle of vodka and pours it over him because he thinks that's going to make it smell so much better.
Oh, so much. Vodka is just the best smelling thing.
So then he rents this room in this house across the street from the cemetery and he like puts the coffin through the window and just leaves it there.
Oh.
And then couple of days later, he cleans everything up, and then he calls a taxi, and he gets the taxi person to help him lift this coffin into the taxi, and then drive it to his plane.
All of these bystanders are just like, what are you guys thinking? Like the store owner and whomever came, like the house and the taxi. Like, what are you guys thinking?
I have no idea. I think we're thinking of something different than they like when we say coffin, we're thinking something different than what it actually looked like. So maybe they had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it was like a Bacta tank where it had like all this glass and you could see like someone floating in there. So maybe it was just like a chest, a metal like chest that, there's no way of knowing. Maybe they thought it was a radiator.
Maybe.
Yeah, who knows? But so he doesn't go to his house because at this time he really doesn't have a house. So he's building at this point a plane.
Oh, that's a big plane. Kind of reminds me of the Trojan horse.
It does look like the Trojan horse, doesn't it? And that's the plane. The plane, he basically puts the body in he puts the coffin in the plane, and that's what becomes his laboratory for the next year.
Okay.
Yeah. And as you can see, this plane isn't really a plane per se. It's more like a weird, like, I don't even know what it is. I don't know how that thing would ever fly.
Yeah.
But mind you, he has been for the last 5 years trying to build this plane to put it back together to fly.
Okay.
Now, at this point, I think Carl has gone completely cuckoo.
Mm-hmm.
Completely cuckoo. He thinks that he's going to work on bringing Elena back to life.
Who's been dead for almost 2 years at this point, right?
Uh-huh. But he's going to work to restore her. And so
Okay.
he diligently begins to clean her up, basically start to put lovely fluids back on her that are going to rehydrate her, and all sorts of fun things like that. It's like he starts replacing her skin with silk, that he basically just puts silk and wax.
Science!
Ew.
And that's how he starts to preserve her skin, which there isn't probably much left at this point. So maybe
Right.
he's just recreating her skin. He's really starting to replace things. He goes to her mother and he gets some hair that she actually had cut off, and he uses her own hair to give her a wig.
And I'm like, Mom, why?
He literally thinks he's going to bring her back to life. He thinks that he starts having these weird ideas and he writes about this, that he believes he can take the plane up into the very first stage of space. I don't know what you call that.
Okay.
But he's going to fly it up with the body, and the radiation is going to reanimate her corpse.
Not only is it a plane, it's a rocket.
I don't. All I know is I don't think that's how science works.
She blinded me with science.
It does sound very Night of the Living Dead thing, because I believe, wasn't it some sort of solar energy from a satellite that made everything like contaminated and reanimated?
I've actually never seen Night of the Living Dead.
What? You have never seen Night of the Living Dead?
I haven't.
Oh my God, we have to rectify this.
Okay.
But remember, radiation. Somehow, some people think radiation means reanimation of corpses.
Science.
I mean, it sounds similar.
It does.
Radiation, reanimation. I don't see where you're getting confused.
I guess it begins with re, right? He also seems to think that she's looking better, that she starts filling out, she's starting to gain weight. I don't know whether he's seeing things, because these are not things that could happen to this corpse. This corpse is not going to start flushing out. This corpse is not going to start looking more beautiful than she did when she was alive.
Mm-mm.
But he writes these things. At some point, he talks about menstrual blood coming out of her vagina.
No.
Yes. So I don't.
What are you doing down there, sir?
I don't know. But at some point, he basically has to find a new home. So he moves down to the beach.
Okay.
And there's this old abandoned shack there. And so he decides to rebuild it and invite some homeless fishermen to come live with him and their 12 dogs. He has his own bedroom with her, and he puts her on the bed, and there she lives with him for the next 7 years.
7 years?
Yep, 7 years. And he's very modest. He allows her modesty. When they're sleeping, he has a cloth come down from the ceiling, and basically it's their privacy cloth so that she can sleep on her side of the bed and not and be in privacy.
What a gentleman.
And let's also note, this is the same bed that he had bought for her and that she had slept in when she was still alive and dying. So technically it's her bed.
I mean,
Is your head hurting yet?
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then at some point, there comes a point where there are rumors flying in the community. Don't know how this happened. Apparently, there was a little boy that was walking by the shack and saw him dancing with a doll, a life-size doll. Whatever the cause, the sister Nana starts to get suspicious. By this time, Nana is kind of the matriarch of the family.
Okay.
Unfortunately, tuberculosis had continued to spread throughout the family. Had been ravaged. The father died in 1934. The mother died in 1940, and then her sister had died. So it was basically just her left. Well, she comes and she basically hears these rumors, and she goes to him and says, "Let me see the grave. Let me see the tomb. Let me see the tomb." And he's like, "Nope.
Show me the receipts."
Nope." And so finally she comes to his house and bangs on the door and says she's going to go to the police. And he's like, no, you don't have to do all that. Why go down to the cemetery to see the tomb? You can see her right here. Come on into the house and come see your sister and how lovely she looks.
First of all, like, are you going to murder me?
I'm not joking. That's what he told her.
Oh, that's so scary.
And so she's kind of like, okay. And so she and her husband go into the house, and they go into the bedroom, and there is a life-size doll on the bed.
But it's not a doll.
At first, she refuses to believe it's her sister.
Naturally.
Everyone else believes it's her sister, but she doesn't. She's like, that's not my sister. And so she basically calls the cops and tells them he's made a doll of my sister. A doll of your sister? I'm like, first of all, what's so illegal about that? But she demands an autopsy be done on the doll. So the cops come to the house, they take the body into custody, and they arrest him. And he spends like several days in jail. They do the autopsy, and sure enough, it turns out that is very much the body of her sister.
Wow.
Yep, it very much was her. But I've looked at the photos, and I cannot find any pictures of before the autopsy and when she was put back together. All of the pictures I've seen come from the autopsy or afterwards.
Okay.
There's a lot of people that have written that when they first saw the corpse, they thought it looked just like Elena.
Really?
But if you look at the pictures that we have,
I don't think it looks like her.
It does. I mean, it's not a bad recreation, to be honest, for what he had from someone who is fairly, but it doesn't really look like her either.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be able to be like, oh, that looks like Elena, blah blah blah. Like, I'm like, that looks like a girl. Like,
exactly. Yeah, I have no idea what. And there's another picture that I've only seen it in one place, but it shows her by a Christmas tree, and it does actually look a lot more like her than any of those photos that you've seen. So I don't know. I don't know if they botched the autopsy and couldn't put her back to the way she was. So maybe he really did do a good job. So Carl is arrested. He's imprisoned. But and they have this whole, this is sensational. This is one of the massive news stories of that time period. I mean, think of it. It's getting to, this is now 1940. So we're getting to very days before World War I. And it's massive. It goes all over the world. So all over the AP wires, there is this story everywhere. And
imagine if that came out today, it'd be everywhere.
Everywhere.
Ugh.
It's absolutely huge. Everyone wants, and here he is. He's just kind of like this little man, just kind of in his little bow tie and his little tennis shoes, just sitting there talking to the judge and the officials. And he's totally, during this whole process, doesn't have his sense in reality, because he's like, she's my wife. She's my wife. She belongs to me.
Yeah, what's wrong with this? She's my wife.
It's like he doesn't seem to understand how this is a problem. And he's like, her father gave me permission to bury her and to take care of her and to care for her. And so I did that. What is wrong with that?
She's not your wife.
They're like, they left her to rot in the ground, and I made her look beautiful again. So just very different sense of what's going on. It turns out there's not much that they could do. The statute of limitations on the potential crimes of which they finally were going to charge it with basically wanton and reckless destruction of a grave. At this point, necrophilia laws really weren't a thing.
Ugh.
Like even now, if you go back to the 90s, they actually had to find different charges to charge people on for necrophilia because there really were no statutes until very recently about specifically having, relations with the corpse. So, I mean, the best you could get was that corpses were considered property of the families and you've stolen property, or you broke into a grave. Those are kind of the closest things they even had to being able to like charge people with these. The problem though is that statutes of limitations have run out. So at the end of the day, because it's been 7 years, they can't charge him with anything.
Wow.
So they let him go. And at the end of everything, he looks up to the judge and says, "So can I have her body back?"
No.
And he's just like, "What the hell are you asking for? No, you can't have her body back.
You can't have her body back.
No, it was not your body to start with. It is still not your body."
Ah! Click it off, dude. Click it off. Dude, what the fuck is wrong with German people?
Yeah. So then this weird thing comes out of society where his story becomes very Ted Bundy-esque in the way that the society looks at it. So you know how Ted Bundy, all the girls started becoming groupies?
Yes.
Well, he started getting a lot of groupies from older middle-aged women.
But he's not cute.
It wasn't groupies because they liked it. They thought he was a tragic figure and it was so romantic. And so he gets this following of him being a helpless romantic that was in this tragedy of him.
Jeez.
So people flock to him to talk to him all day and all night and want him to tell their story.
Wow.
And
Not
so
about
he tells
Elena.
the story and he tells the story and he tells the story. Well, unfortunately, Elena, things didn't work out so well for Elena and her family. Elena's body, after it's been analyzed, is put back together and they decide to have another viewing.
Yes.
I don't know who decided to. I don't know if the family did. I don't know if they're just like, we need to show the world what happened. But they had a full viewing at the funeral home and tens of thousands of Key West people came to see it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, schools got out early so the kids could go and see the body.
What?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Not my first parenting choice, but okay.
You know, the Dean Lopez Funeral Home, that's, if you go online, you can see all the pictures of her and the kids just all in the background. It really is just, I don't think you would ever see anything like this today. It's such a strange thought for us. Well, they decide that because they know that, he's gonna keep trying to get her body back. They decide that, the best thing they can do is to basically rebury her in secret.
Wow.
So basically she's going to get an unmarked grave where no one knows where it is.
That's so sad that his actions have now made her have to even hide in death.
And when I say no one, not even her sister is going to know where she's buried.
No.
basically the sheriff, the cemetery sexton, and the funeral director all get together and they decide that they're going to keep it a secret. And so under the cover of darkness, they take her body, they cut it up into pieces, and they basically dismember her. And they cut it down so that she fits into basically a hand chest, something that you can carry in your hands. Because what they figure is that if they dig a hole, no one's going to be looking for something so small.
Yeah.
Cut her up, put her in this chest, and somewhere bury her. And those three take it to their graves.
Now, did the sister at least consent to her being, like, taken secretly? Did they just do that behind everybody's back, or did the sister at least be like, yes, I consent to you taking her secretly and I will not know where she is?
I've never been able to ascertain that. Apparently, most everybody knows that will print that it was handled in secrecy, where no one was told where she was buried. The account of her actually being cut up and that taking place comes from Ben Harrison's book. And Ben Harrison, actually, in the 90s, he went around to those who were still alive, who had personally known the family members. And one of the people that he actually had talked to was the son of the former police chief. And the former police chief had been Elena's friend and had been one of the ones that had taken place in the final burial.
Well, I hope that she at least knew that they were going to take her. It's not like she woke up and was like, where's my sister?
Mm-hmm. I mean, she probably authorized it. She probably was like, yeah, I don't want her to, let's just
him to find her again or anything.
Yeah. So she was probably willing to have anything at that point. So
yeah. Wow.
So sad.
Rude jerk.
And unfortunately, Nana dies herself of tuberculosis in 1944.
No, Nana.
So the entire Hoyos family is now dead, and that ends that chapter of that family.
Wow.
Well, that year, 1944, Tanzler Carl just, he starts realizing there's nothing left for him. The body is buried somewhere. He doesn't, he's running out of money. Everything that he's tried to do to capitalize, he had tried to get a movie made about this. It didn't happen. And so he decides he's going to leave town. And so, but he's going to go out with a bang and basically give a final fuck you to everyone else that has done this to him and his beloved. So he leaves. As he's leaving town, several hours later, a huge explosion is heard from the cemetery. They go to the cemetery and they found that the mausoleum, the tomb that had basically stayed empty all these years, was destroyed and a bomb had gone off in there.
Oh my God.
They say they've never been able to tell who did it, but I think it's pretty clear that Tanzler did it on his way out. I know
who did it.
You know who did it.
I know.
You know. Well, Tanzler goes up north to live with his sister. Also is really weird is that he finally runs into his family again.
Children and his wife.
Yeah, his wife and his daughter. His other daughter had died in 1934, and he didn't bother to even respond to any of the letters about her death.
If he couldn't get any more of a jerk.
Yep. And even more so, his wife, who had to have been a really, really just lovely woman, long-suffering, basically pays for his living for the rest of his days.
Wow.
Yeah. Carl spends the rest of his days entertaining people who come to his house. In 1947, he needs money again, so he publishes a story called The Secret of Elena's Tomb under the title of Fantastic Adventures. And it's from that is the diary that eventually gets republished as The Lost Diary of Count von Cossel.
Wow.
1950, he naturalized and became an American citizen.
We don't want him.
You don't want him? Well,
I don't want him.
What's interesting is that 2 housewives were his witnesses. That's actually really unusual too for a man for that time period to have housewives, basically his sponsors.
Huh.
So who knows? Were these some of his groupies?
Probably.
Mm-hmm. He was listed as a German citizen on his papers, and his occupations were as a genealogist, a pathologist, and a farmer.
A farmer.
A farmer.
Well, he did have his laboratory/farm.
Mm-hmm. Well, in 1952, at 2 years after he enjoys his American citizenship, he is found dead behind one of his beloved organs.
I'm sorry. Like organs, like the music.
Yes, the music kind.
I was like, did he keep one of her organs?
I mean, I forgot to mention that in addition to him being a count, just like being a count, he played the organ.
Once I start in counting, it's very hard to stop. Hey!
Fitting.
I know, yes. And he actually was quite good. He actually had a thing for building pipe organs.
Oh, that's cool.
So, and he would spend hours serenading his lovely beloved.
Mm.
What else do you do when she can't talk back? But the popular myth says that he was clutching onto the death mask of Elena, but he actually didn't. He died behind an organ, and there was an effigy with a death mask of his beloved, but it was on a shelf in a metal case.
Okay.
So, but he still had that. He had a life-size effigy that he figured that was his consolation prize.
It's so yucky.
Yes. But fitting, perhaps, was that he was found 3 weeks after he died.
Ha! Right.
That is the tale of the Corpse Bride of Key West.
That's so sad.
Elena, just unfortunately, nothing went right for her in her life.
Yeah.
Or in her death, even.
Yeah. So can you imagine if she's like up there watching, being like, excuse me, leave my body alone, please.
Don't no touchy. No touchy.
Send me back. I need to hunt him.
Now, I don't know if we can consider him a true necrophiliac.
Mm-hmm.
Under the classifications, there are about 10 classes of necrophilia that have been that under a psychologist named Anil Agrawal in 2009. He published a paper called A New Classification of Necrophilia, and this would fall under class 2 as a, quote, romantic necrophiliac, and these are basically bereaved people who remain attached to their dead lover's body. So technically, I mean, he was attached to her. He wasn't really attached to the fact that she was dead. So can that be considered true necrophilia? It's more situational necrophilia. And you might hear some rumors that he did consummate his love.
I of course, like, I would find it hard to believe that he didn't.
I mean, there's the only evidence we have of that is that in the 1970s, we're talking 40 years after all this happened, the 2 pathologists who had examined, who had done the autopsy, went on some TV shows and basically said, oh yeah, and we found a cardboard tube in her for a vagina. But can we trust them considering they came up with this 40 years later? Why didn't they say this during the actual investigations?
Mm-hmm.
Like one of them even says that they found seminal fluid. How do they know it was fucking seminal fluid?
Yeah.
I'm not saying he didn't, because he might have, but everything that I've read from his book, and I don't think he's going to come out and says, "Oh, I fucked my wife." He doesn't say that, but you read what his book. He doesn't come off at all as a sexual being. Like there is nothing. I thought she was hot. There's none of this like I looked at her and she made me like. There's just nothing that indicates that he's having sexy thoughts about her. It's all this, and the way he writes is this very Victorian, great love in my heart. It's not really one of those tangible loves, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So I don't know. In some ways, I actually think because he's never was known to have actually chased women. He didn't have many friends. Yes, he had like a couple of daughters, but I actually wonder if he was personally asexual himself.
Maybe.
So, of course, we'll never know.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that is the tale of Elena de Hoyos and Karl von Tanzler.
Poor Elena and her family.
Now, if you go to Key West today, her tomb, of course, was blown up. It's gone. It was removed, and the land was resold. But there is, if you go to the Martello Museum, there is supposedly a piece of the plaque that went from that tomb, and they've kind of reconstructed part of it as a museum piece.
That's cool.
Yeah, so you can go and see that. You can still go to the cemetery and see it's actually a very cool cemetery, a lot of above ground crypts because that it's a very low water table, so you really digging graves really doesn't work that well there.
Right. Wow. Oh, so fun.
And it's your birthday too.
It was my birthday.
Happy
Yay!
birthday, Carls.
Thank you.
So who are you going to do next?
I'm not going to tell you who, but I'm going to tell you that it's a couple.
A couple? Oh, that sounds intriguing.
My book actually is coming today.
Yay.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear. Well, that brings us to a close of our episode number 4.
You can email us at twofriendsinacoffin@gmail.com.
That's 2 friends, not 3 friends, not 4 friends, but
2
friends.
Follow us on Instagram at twofriendsinacoffin. We'll be posting pictures. We're on Twitter at 2 friends, the number 2 friends and coffin. It's like 2 friends coffin at once. And then Facebook.
Yeah, 2 friends in a coffin.
Yeah.
We're on Apple iTunes and Spotify where our episodes can be heard. Thank you again for being great listeners, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.